The fluorescent lights of Ms. Worthington's third-grade classroom hummed a monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the colorful posters plastered on the walls, proclaiming the week's theme, Career Week. Jallen Brooks, all of 8 years old, sat perched on the edge of his tiny plastic chair, his legs swinging restlessly, a knot of anticipation tightening in his stomach. Today was his turn. Today, he would tell everyone about his dad. He'd practiced the words 100 times, whispering them to his reflection in the bathroom mirror, mouthing them to his dog, Buster. My dad is an aerospace engineer. He works at NASA. The words, imbued with a child's innocent pride, tasted sweet on his tongue. He imagined the awe in his classmates' eyes, the impressed nod from Mr. Denton, their substitute teacher for the week. He pictured himself standing tall, a miniature replica of his father, his chest puffed out with the weight of his father's extraordinary profession. The first few presentations blurred in Jallen's mind: a fireman, a librarian, a chef. Each announcement was met with polite claps, the predictable rhythm lulling him into a false sense of security. He barely registered Mila's soft smile from across the aisle or Gwen's thumbs up from the row behind. His focus remained laser-sharp on the front of the room, on Mr. Denton, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, a man who held their small world within the confines of his classroom in an iron grip. Finally, it was his turn. Jallen's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He walked to the front of the class, his small sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, the sound amplified in the sudden hush. He clutched the edges of his worn-out Captain America t-shirt, a nervous tic he hadn't realized he'd developed. He could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on him, their expectant gaze a tangible force. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "My dad," he began, his voice barely a whisper, the practiced words catching in his throat. He cleared his throat, trying again. "My dad works at NASA." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the expectant hush of anticipation. It was a thick, heavy silence, pregnant with something Jallen couldn't quite decipher. He looked at Mr. Denton, seeking the anticipated nod of approval, the shared smile of understanding. Instead, Mr. Denton's lips curled into a dismissive smirk. A short, sharp laugh escaped him, a sound that pricked at Jallen like a needle. "NASA, huh?" Mr. Denton's voice dripped with a condescending amusement that made Jallen's stomach churn. "That's quite the imagination, Jallen." Jallen felt a cold dread creep up his spine, icy fingers clutching at his heart. The knot in his stomach tightened, twisting into a painful knot of shame. He had expected awe, admiration, maybe even a little envy. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for this. A ripple of snickers spread through the classroom, like a contagious disease. The faces that moments ago held curious anticipation now wore expressions of amusement, of disbelief. Even Mila's smile had faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. Gwen's thumbs up had disappeared. "Yeah, right," a boy in the front row muttered, his voice laced with mockery. The words, though small, echoed in Jallen's ears, amplified by the sudden, crushing weight of humiliation. He felt a blush creep up his neck, staining his cheeks a fiery red. Jallen's carefully constructed world, a world where his father was a hero, a world where his pride was a shield, crumbled around him like a house of cards. The words he'd practiced, words that felt so powerful, so full of meaning, now seemed hollow, ridiculous. He felt small, insignificant, a liar exposed under the harsh glare of the classroom lights. His gaze dropped to the floor, the colorful patterns of the classroom rug blurring through the film of tears that welled in his eyes. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards, to become invisible. He wanted to run, to escape the suffocating weight of their disbelief, but his feet felt rooted to the spot, heavy as lead. The laughter, the whispers, the mocking glances, they all merged into a cacophony of humiliation that reverberated through his small frame. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of shame. He hadn't understood before. He hadn't understood the subtle nuances of adult conversations, the veiled criticisms, the dismissive tones when his father's name was mentioned. He hadn't understood the looks, the whispers, the sideways glances. He hadn't understood why his father always seemed a little different, a little less celebrated than the fathers of his friends. Now, standing here, under the scrutiny of his classmates and the condescending gaze of Mr. Denton, he began to understand. A terrible, chilling understanding that seeped into his bones, leaving a bitter residue of shame and confusion. He wanted to tell them. He wanted to scream at them, to explain that his father really did work at NASA, that he really was an aerospace engineer. He wanted to tell them about the late nights his father spent hunched over blueprints, the complicated equations scrawled across whiteboards, the hushed phone calls about rockets and satellites in space. He wanted to tell them about the pride in his father's eyes when he talked about his work, the quiet strength that radiated from him, the unwavering belief in the power of science and exploration. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped in his throat, choked by the rising tide of humiliation. He stood there, frozen, a small, broken figure under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, the weight of their disbelief crushing him, stealing his voice, stealing his pride. The world, once bright and full of promise, now seemed dim, shrouded in a fog of doubt and shame. The air in the garage hung thick with the scent of sawdust and motor oil, a familiar comfort to Jallen. Sunlight, fractured by the dusty panes of the high windows, painted stripes across the concrete floor where he sat cross-legged amidst a constellation of tools. He watched his father, Dr. Kelvin Brooks, hunched over the workbench, his brow furrowed in concentration as he meticulously cleaned the intricate parts of a small, drone-like device. Jallen knew, with the unwavering certainty only an 8-year-old could possess, that this was something special, something connected to the vast, mysterious world his father inhabited at NASA. He'd seen pictures, blurry and awe-inspiring, of rockets taller than the tallest trees, and control rooms filled with blinking lights and serious-faced people. It was a world he yearned to understand, a world that felt both intimately close and impossibly distant. He picked up a stray bolt, turning it over in his small hands. Its metallic coolness pressed against his skin, a tangible link to the intangible wonders his father worked with. "Dad," he began, the question having simmered in his mind for days. "What's it like, up there?" Dr. Brooks paused, his hand hovering over a tiny screwdriver. He glanced at Jallen, a gentle smile softening the lines of his face. "Up where, son?" Jallen gestured vaguely upwards, his eyes wide. "In space, with the rovers and stuff." He felt a familiar thrill course through him, a mixture of excitement and a strange, undefined longing. The rovers, those mechanical explorers traversing the dusty plains of Mars, held a particular fascination for him. He imagined them as lonely pioneers, bravely venturing into the unknown, sending back whispers of secrets from a world beyond his reach. His father chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound that echoed in the confines of the garage. He set down the screwdriver, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "Well, it's not quite like Star Trek, Jallen. I don't actually go up there myself." A flicker of disappointment, so fleeting it was almost imperceptible, crossed Jallen's face. He knew his father didn't fly rockets, not like the astronauts in the glossy magazines. But still, he worked at NASA. That had to mean something extraordinary. Dr. Brooks, ever perceptive to the nuances of his son's emotions, seemed to sense his momentary deflation. But, he continued, his voice regaining its earlier warmth, "I do get to talk to them." He tapped the small device on the workbench. "This little guy here, he's part of a navigation system for the Mars rover. We're testing some new software to help it avoid obstacles." Jallen's eyes widened again, his earlier disappointment forgotten. "You talked to the rover?" He imagined his father whispering secrets to the little robot, sharing jokes across the vast emptiness of space. "Not exactly talk," Dr. Brooks clarified, picking up the device again. "More like sending instructions. We tell it where to go, what to do, what pictures to take." He held the device up, turning it in the light. "It's a bit like texting, actually." Jallen frowned, considering this. "Texting?" But Mars is really far away, right? He'd heard his teacher, Mr. Denton, mention it in class once, dismissing it as a cold, barren wasteland. The thought cast a momentary shadow over his excitement. Very far, his father confirmed. Millions of miles, which means he paused, drawing out the suspense. It takes a while for the messages to get there. Wait, Jallen's brow furrowed in thought. So the rover has to wait how long to send a message back to Earth? Depending on where Mars is in orbit, anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, Dr. Brooks answered, a hint of amusement in his voice. Jallen's mind reeled at the thought. 20 minutes, an eternity in his world. So, he finally concluded, his eyes lighting up with understanding. It's like texting someone with really bad service. His father burst out laughing, a rich, hearty sound that filled the garage. Jallen grinned, pleased with his analogy. He felt a surge of pride, a deep, quiet satisfaction and understanding, even in this small way, the complexities of his father's work. It wasn't about rockets and spacesuits, not exactly. But it was something even more intriguing, something that whispered of hidden codes and distant worlds, of challenges overcome and mysteries unveiled. He looked at his father, his eyes shining with a newfound admiration. He knew, with unshakable certainty, that his father did something important, something extraordinary. He knew, because his father had shared a piece of that extraordinary world with him. Here in the familiar, comforting chaos of their garage, amidst the scent of sawdust and motor oil, surrounded by the silent witnesses of their shared passion. This quiet moment, bathed in the afternoon sun, cemented a truth in Jallen's heart, a truth he would carry with him into the classroom, a truth he would defend against the dismissive words of his teacher, a truth as solid and real as the cool metal of the bolt he still held clutched in his hand. The world outside might doubt, might dismiss, might misunderstand. But here, in this small, sun-drenched space, he and his father shared a secret language, a language of whispered instructions and distant echoes, a language that spoke not just of science and technology, but of love, trust, and the unwavering belief in the power of shared discovery. And that, Jallen knew, was a truth worth more than all the rockets in the world. The muted glow of the night light cast long, dancing shadows across the walls of Jallen's room, turning familiar objects into strange, alien landscapes. A half-built Lego spaceship sat perched precariously on his desk, a testament to his dreams of interstellar travel, dreams fueled by the very real rockets his father designed. Jallen clutched a thick, manila folder to his chest, its contents of precious cargo photographs, sketches, and articles detailing the intricacies of his father's work at NASA. He traced the outline of the NASA logo with a small finger, the rough texture of the paper a comforting grounding in a world that often felt beyond his grasp. His heart, usually a steady drumbeat in his chest, fluttered with a nervous anticipation. 3 days. 3 days until career week at school. 3 days until he could finally share the pride that swelled within him, a pride so profound it sometimes felt like it would burst from his small frame. He pushed the folder towards his father, who sat perched on the edge of the bed, the soft glow of his tablet illuminating his face. Dr. Kelvin Brooks, a man who navigated the complexities of aerospace engineering, now looked at his son with an intensity usually reserved for complex equations. "Can I show them this at school, Dad?" Jallen's voice barely whispered the question, a fragile butterfly of sound in the quiet room. His own internal monologue, however, roared with the question. Would showing these tangible pieces of his father's world finally make Mr. Din believe him? Would it silence the dismissive tone, the raised eyebrow, the air of disbelief that had clung to the teacher like a second skin ever since Jallen had first mentioned his father's profession? Dr. Brooks closed the tablet, the sudden absence of its light deepening the shadows in the room. He took the folder, flipping through its contents with careful fingers. Each image, each article, was a small piece of his life, a life dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human exploration. He knew how much these things meant to Jallen, how much they represented. A subtle tightening in his chest echoed the anxiety he sensed in his son. He knew Jallen's teacher. He'd met him at the last parent-teacher conference. The man seemed disconnected, lost in his own world. You don't need to fold her, Jallen. Dr. Brooks's voice was soft, a gentle counterpoint to the frantic beat of Jallen's heart. He placed the folder back on the bed, a silent acknowledgement of its weight, both physical and emotional. All you need is your voice. Just tell them what I do. Tell them about the rockets, about exploring space. Tell them you're proud. His words were a gentle push, a nudge towards self-assuredness. Jallen fiddled with the edge of his blanket, a nervous habit he hadn't yet outgrown. His internal voice battled with the quiet strength of his father's words. What if showing the pictures was the only way? What if his words, small and hesitant, weren't enough to penetrate Mr. Denton's skepticism? What if they don't believe me? The question hung in the air, heavy with the fear of rejection, the sting of invalidation. The memory of Mr. Denton's condescending smile, the way he'd brushed off Jallen's explanation about his father working on the Mars rover, resurfaced with a painful clarity. It had felt like being erased, like his pride, his very reality, was being dismissed as a childish fantasy. Dr. Brooks reached out, his hand warm and strong on Jallen's small shoulder. Then that's their problem, not yours. His gaze held Jallen's, a silent conversation passing between them. He understood the weight of his son's worry. He recognized the vulnerability that lay beneath the brave front. He knew what it was like to have your passion, your dedication, met with indifference, even ridicule. Jallen, he continued, his voice a low rumble, the truth doesn't need proof. It simply is. And your truth is that your father worked for NASA. You know it. I know it. And that's all that matters. He squeezed Jallen's shoulder gently. Don't let anyone dim your light, son. Your pride in me, in what we do, is a powerful thing. Don't be afraid to share it. Jallen looked at his father, his eyes wide and searching. He saw not just a NASA engineer, but a man of quiet strength, a man who faced challenges with a calm resolve. He saw a reflection of the confidence he longed to possess. His father's words, though simple, resonated deep within him. They weren't just about career week. They were about navigating the world, about holding onto your truth even when it was met with doubt. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with a newfound courage. The folder, still lying on the bed, suddenly seemed less important. The photographs and articles were just things, external validations. The real validation, the kind that truly mattered, came from within. It stemmed from the unshakable bond between father and son, from the shared pride in a dream that reached for the stars. The shadows in the room seemed to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. 3 days. 3 days until career week. 3 days until Jallen could stand before his class, not with a folder full of proof, but with a voice filled with pride, a voice that would speak his truth, unwavering and clear. He knew there might be skepticism, maybe even disbelief. But for the first time, that prospect didn't feel so daunting. He had his father's words, a quiet strength to hold on to, a reminder that his truth was his own, and no one could take that away from him. He looked at the Lego spaceship on his desk, its unfinished form a symbol of the journeys yet to come, both in space and in life. And he smiled. The afternoon sun cast long, rectangular shadows across the classroom floor, each dust mote dancing in the golden rays like a tiny, frantic ballerina. The air, thick with the scent of construction paper and the faint, sweet aroma of Elmer's glue, hung heavy with anticipation. Jallen Brooks, all of 8 years old, sat perched on the edge of a small plastic chair, his legs swinging nervously, barely brushing the floor. He clutched a crumpled NASA sticker in his sweaty palm, its edges softening under the pressure. Each presentation, each proud parent showcasing their mundane yet respectable professions, felt like a tiny hammer blow against his fragile hope. A fireman, a librarian, a baker, all ordinary, all present. Where was his father? The grand promise of rockets and stars, of a world beyond the clouds, began to feel as distant and unattainable as the moon itself. He glanced at the clock again, the red second hand ticking with an almost malicious slowness. Mr. Denton, his teacher, stood by the whiteboard, a tight smile plastered on his face. A smile Jallen recognized, the kind that didn't quite reach the eyes, the kind that held a hint of something else. Disbelief? Disdain? Jallen couldn't quite place it, but the uncertainty gnawed at him, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. "And now, class," Mr. Denton announced, his voice echoing slightly in the now quieter room. "We have just enough time for one more presentation." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering just a fraction too long on Jallen. That look again. It prickled Jallen's skin like 1,000 tiny needles. He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat growing with each passing second. He imagined his father, tall and strong, striding into the room, a miniature rocket tucked under his arm. He imagined the awe on his classmates' faces, the grudging respect in Mr. Denton's eyes. But the doorway remained stubbornly empty. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Jallen could hear the whispers starting, the sideways glances. Mila, her bright blue eyes filled with concern, offered him a tentative smile. Gwen, ever the pragmatist, simply shrugged, her freckled nose wrinkling in a gesture of shared disappointment. Their small acts of solidarity, though appreciated, did little to quell the rising tide of shame that threatened to engulf him. He had boasted, hadn't he? He had bragged about his father, about NASA, about the stars. Now, it felt like those very stars were mocking him, their distant twinkle a cruel reminder of his empty promises. He thought back to last night, the excitement bubbling in his chest as he recounted his day at school. He told his father about Career Week, about the presentations, about how he couldn't wait to tell everyone about his dad's amazing job. His father, as always, had listened patiently, his dark eyes filled with a quiet warmth that always made Jallen feel safe. He'd promised to be there, a promise Jallen had clung to like a lifeline. Now, that lifeline felt frayed, about to snap under the weight of his mounting humiliation. The classroom clock ticked on, each second an eternity. Mr. Denton cleared his throat, that tight smile returning. "Well, Jallen," he began, his voice laced with a false cheerfulness that grated on Jallen's nerves. "It seems your father is unable to make it today." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken judgment. "Perhaps," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "he's busy with his important work?" Jallen's cheeks burned, the shame a physical ache in his chest. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards, to become invisible. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to vanish. Then, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the suffocating silence. "I apologize for the delay, Mr. Denton." Jallen's eyes flew open. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, was his father. Tall and imposing, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, he held a large, metallic case in his hand. The case, Jallen knew, contained a marvel, a piece of the very sky his father helped to conquer. Relief washed over Jallen, a wave so powerful it almost knocked him from his chair. The knot in his stomach loosened, the tightness in his chest eased. He could breathe again. Mr. Denton, his face a mask of surprise bordering on disbelief, stammered, Dr. Brooks? You're here." The carefully constructed facade of control crumbled, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty that Jallen found strangely satisfying. Dr. Brooks offered a polite nod, his gaze sweeping across the room, settling briefly on his son. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. In that single glance, Jallen saw a world of understanding, of shared experience, of unwavering support. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent conversation that transcended words. "Indeed, I am," Dr. Brooks replied, his voice calm and steady. He stepped into the classroom, his presence filling the space with an aura of quiet authority. The metallic case in his hand gleamed, reflecting the sunlight, a silent promise of wonders yet to be revealed. The room held its breath. The game, Jallen realized, had changed. The afternoon sun, a molten gold through the large classroom windows, cast long shadows across the checkered linoleum floor. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, a silent, swirling ballet oblivious to the tension tightening the air in Mrs. Peterson's third-grade class. Jallen sat hunched at his desk, the earlier bravado replaced by a gnawing emptiness. The astronaut cutout lay limp on his desk, a stark reminder of his shattered pride. He could still feel the sting of Mr. Denton's dismissive words, echoing in the quiet corners of his mind. He traced the outline of the astronaut's helmet with a trembling finger, a silent, desperate plea for the impossible, for the floor to swallow him whole, for time to rewind, for his father to magically appear. He didn't dare look up. The whispers and giggles felt like tiny needles pricking at his skin. Shame, hot and suffocating, coiled around him, squeezing the air from his lungs. He believed in his father, in the wonder of his work, and that belief had been crushed, pulverized under the weight of Mr. Denton's skepticism. Mr. Denton, oblivious to the storm raging inside the small boy, continued his monotonous drone about the importance of honesty and realistic aspirations. Jallen barely registered the words. His mind, a trapped bird, flitted from the image of his father working late in his study, surrounded by blueprints and equations, to the cold, disbelieving look in Mr. Denton's eyes. He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat a painful reminder of the tears he was desperately trying to hold back. He focused on the dust motes, willing them to distract him, to carry him away from the suffocating reality of the classroom. Each tick of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow, driving deeper the wedge of humiliation. A sudden hush fell over the room. Jallen, startled, slowly lifted his head. The classroom door, previously ajar, was now wide open, framing a figure that made Jallen's breath catch in his throat. His father, taller than even his memory held, Dr. Brooks, stood at the threshold, bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. He held a large, metallic briefcase in one hand, the other casually tucked into the pocket of his slacks. His presence filled the doorway, radiating a quiet strength that seemed to push back the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the class. Jallen felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, fragile yet insistent. Could this be it? Could his father, his quiet, steady father, be the one to finally silence the doubts, to mend the cracks in his shattered pride? He held his breath, his small hands clenching into fists beneath his desk. He watched, mesmerized, as his father took a step into the room, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the students, finally settling on Mr. Denton. "Hello." Dr. Brooks' voice resonated through the room, calm and steady. "I'm Dr. Brooks. I designed spacecraft." The silence that followed was absolute. The dust motes seemed to hang suspended in the air, the ticking clock suddenly muffled. Jallen's classmates stared, wide-eyed, at his father. Mila and Gwen exchanged excited glances, a silent acknowledgement of the vindication Jallen so desperately craved. Mr. Denton, his face drained of color, stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The carefully constructed wall of his authority seemed to crumble, brick by brick, under the weight of those simple words. "I designed spacecraft." Jallen felt a wave of warmth wash over him, chasing away the lingering chill of humiliation. He straightened in his seat, his small chest expanding with a newfound sense of pride. His father's presence, his calm assertion of his profession, was a shield against the ridicule, a balm to his wounded spirit. He watched as his father's gaze, sharp and unwavering, met Mr. Denton's. In that silent exchange, Jallen saw a subtle shift in power, a silent acknowledgement of the truth. He had spoken of fantastical things, things beyond the comprehension of his teacher, but they were not fantasies. They were his reality. His father, the man who tucked him into bed at night, the man who helped him with his math homework, was a designer of spacecraft. And in that moment, in the hushed silence of the classroom, the impossible became real, the fantastical became mundane. Mr. Denton's carefully constructed world, a world of limitations and preconceived notions, had been gently, irrevocably, altered. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Jallen saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the realization that he had misjudged, underestimated, and ultimately been proven wrong. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the soft whir of the air conditioning. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, the authority figure dethroned, not by force, but by the simple, undeniable truth. Jallen, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and triumph, dared to meet his teacher's gaze. In that moment, he understood something profound. Belief, true belief, didn't need validation from others. It existed in the quiet corners of the heart, in the shared moments between father and son, in the wonder of a dream taking flight, reaching for the stars. The fluorescent lights of the staff lounge hummed, a dull counterpoint to the rhythmic tapping of Mr. Denton's pen against the legal pad. He stared at the stark white paper, the blue lines blurring slightly as he wrestled with something more complex than any lesson plan he'd ever devised. An apology. To an 8-year-old, the thought a bitter pill lodged in his throat. He'd been teaching for 15 years, 15 years of carefully constructed authority, of maintaining a facade of unwavering control. And now, a small boy with earnest eyes and a quiet dignity had chipped away at that carefully constructed wall. He recalled the scene from earlier that day, the auditorium buzzing with excited chatter, the colorful displays, and Jallen Brooks standing beside his father, an actual rocket scientist. Dr. Brooks, a man whose quiet presence radiated an intellect that silenced the room, had gently placed a hand on Jallen's shoulder. The boy's small frame had straightened, the earlier shadows of doubt and hurt vanishing under the warmth of his father's touch. It was a silent affirmation, a powerful testament to a bond that Mr. Denton, in his haste to judge, had utterly dismissed. The memory pricked at him, a sharp, uncomfortable sensation that resonated with the growing unease in his gut. Mr. Denton sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of his own misjudgment. He finally began to write, the words forming slowly, each one a reluctant admission of his failure. He folded the note carefully, the crisp edges mirroring the sharp sting of his self-reproach. He hadn't just doubted a child. He had inadvertently reinforced the subtle, insidious prejudices that Jallen, with his worn shoes and quiet demeanor, likely faced daily. The realization settled upon him, a heavy cloak of shame. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty classroom as Mr. Denton walked back from the staff lounge. The air, thick with the lingering scent of glue and construction paper from the day's activities, felt heavy, oppressive. He paused at the door, a sudden wave of trepidation washing over him. He had always prided himself on his ability to connect with his students, to foster an environment of trust and respect. But with Jallen, he had failed spectacularly. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and stepped inside. The classroom was eerily quiet, the colorful posters on the walls seeming to mock him with their cheerful vibrancy. Jallen sat alone at his desk, his small back hunched over a drawing. He didn't look up as Mr. Denton approached, his silence more accusatory than any outburst could have been. Mr. Denton felt a knot tighten in his chest. The boy's quiet vulnerability was a stark contrast to the boisterous confidence he usually displayed. He had broken something precious, something he wasn't sure he could repair. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the stillness. Jallen finally looked up, his dark eyes, usually sparkling with curiosity, now clouded with a quiet sadness. The sight pierced Mr. Denton, a sharp pang of guilt twisting in his gut. He held out the folded note, his hand trembling slightly. "Jallen," he began, his voice hoarse, "I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big, Mr. Denton." The words felt inadequate, hollow in the vast silence of the classroom. He watched as Jallen slowly unfolded the note, his small fingers meticulously smoothing out the creases. His expression remained unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that hid the storm of emotions raging within. Mr. Denton desperately wanted to see a flicker of forgiveness, a hint of the bright, inquisitive spark that had drawn him to teaching in the first place. But there was nothing, just a quiet acceptance that felt more like a condemnation. Jallen carefully refolded the note, and placed it in his desk, the simple action carrying the weight of a final judgment. He didn't speak, didn't offer any sign of absolution. And in that silence, Mr. Denton understood. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily mended. It was a slow, delicate process, one that required more than just words. It required consistent action, a genuine change of heart. He stood there for a moment longer, the silence stretching between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. He wanted to say more, to explain, to justify his actions. But the words wouldn't come. He knew that any further attempt at apology would only sound hollow, insincere. He finally nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his transgression, and turned to leave. As he reached the door, he glanced back. Jallen was still sitting at his desk, his small figure silhouetted against the fading light. He was drawing again, his pencil moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Mr. Denton couldn't see what he was drawing, but he imagined it was a rocket, soaring through the vast expanse of space, carrying with it the dreams of a boy whose spirit, despite the hurt, remained unbroken. And in that image, Mr. Denton found a glimmer of hope, a flicker of belief that perhaps, just perhaps, he could still earn back the trust he had so carelessly squandered. The road would be long, the climb steep, but he was determined to try. The weight of his mistake settled heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of a lesson. He had learned a lesson taught not by textbooks or lectures, but by the quiet dignity of an 8-year-old boy. The aroma of ginger and garlic clung to the air, a familiar comfort in the small, warmly lit kitchen. Steam curled from the pot of jajangmyeon on the stove, a gentle hiss punctuating the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Jallen sat at the kitchen table, picking at a loose thread on his favorite space-themed placemat, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to the grayness clinging to his thoughts. He'd barely touched his dinner, the noodles a tangled mass on his plate, mirroring the confusion churning within him. Across the table, his father, Dr. Kelvin Brooks, stirred the noodles in his own bowl, a furrow creasing his brow. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of chopsticks against ceramic. Jallen knew his father was waiting, patient as always, letting him unravel the tangled threads of his emotions at his own pace. He wished he could articulate the hollowness that had taken root in his chest, the echo of Mr. Denton's laughter reverberating through his small frame. He finally looked up, his voice barely a whisper. Why do people do that? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. His father met his gaze, his dark eyes filled with a quiet understanding that made Jallen's throat tighten. He hadn't even needed to explain that refer to the dismissive laughter, the condescending tone, the way Mr. Denton had looked at him like he was some kind of pretender. He'd seen it in his father's eyes when he'd arrived at the classroom, a flicker of something cold and sharp before it was smoothed over with a practiced composure. Even now, a residue of that coldness lingered in the air, a silent testament to the hurt that had rippled through them both. Dr. Brooks set his chopsticks down, the click echoing in the quiet kitchen. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his bowl. He seemed to be searching for the right words, a familiar habit Jallen had come to recognize. His father always chose his words carefully, as if each one held a specific weight, a precise meaning. Because sometimes, he began, his voice low and steady, they see the world in a small box, and when something doesn't fit inside it, they laugh. They laugh because it's easier than questioning their own understanding, than expanding the boundaries of their own little world. Jallen chewed on his lower lip, his mind replaying the scene in the classroom. Mr. Denton's laughter, the snickers of a few classmates, the way Mila and Gwen had squeezed his hand in silent support. He thought about the complex equations his father scribbled on whiteboards, the intricate models of spacecraft that adorned their living room, the late nights spent hunched over blueprints, a quiet hum of concentration vibrating from his study. None of that fit in Mr. Denton's small box. He thought about how, despite the laughter, his father had held his head high, his voice steady as he explained the intricacies of his work, the passion in his eyes unwavering. A quiet pride bloomed in Jallen's chest. He knew, with unwavering certainty, that his father's world was vast, stretching beyond the confines of Mr. Denton's limited perception. But either way, his father continued, drawing Jallen back to the present. It's not your job to shrink for them. It's not your job to make yourself fit into their limited understanding. Your truth, Jallen, is bigger than their laughter. He reached across the table, his hand covering Jallen's small fist. The warmth of his touch seeped into Jallen's skin, a comforting anchor in the swirling sea of his emotions. Don't let someone else's doubt erase your truth, he said, his voice firm but gentle. You know who your father is. You know what he does. And that's all that matters. A wave of relief washed over Jallen, the tightness in his chest easing. He looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw not just the brilliant aerospace engineer, but the man who read him bedtime stories, who taught him how to ride his bike, who held him close when he had nightmares. This was his truth, a truth so profound and unwavering that no amount of laughter could diminish it. He squeezed his father's hand, the silent affirmation speaking volumes. The shame that had clung to him like a shadow began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet strength. He understood now. Mr. Denton's laughter wasn't a reflection of his father's worth, but a reflection of Mr. Denton's own limitations. It was a small, brittle sound trying to drown out a much larger, more resonant truth. He picked up his chopsticks, the weight of them feeling different now, somehow lighter. He took a bite of the noodles, the familiar taste grounding him, reminding him of the solid, unwavering reality of his own world. The ginger and garlic filled his senses, a comforting aroma that spoke of home, of family, of unwavering love. He knew there would be other Mr. Dentons in the world, other small boxes waiting to confine and diminish. But he also knew, deep in his heart, that his truth, his father's truth, was too big, too bright to be contained. It would always find a way to shine through, a beacon in the darkness, illuminating the vastness of their own unique universe. The morning air, crisp and carrying the scent of damp earth, did little to ease the knot in Jallen's stomach. He clutched his worn copy of A Wrinkle in Time. Its pages softened with countless rereads, the fantastical adventures within a stark contrast to the very real anxieties churning inside him. Yesterday's events played on repeat in his mind. Mr. Denton's condescending tone, the snickers of some classmates, the burning shame that had crept up his neck and settled in his cheeks. He hadn't slept well, each time drifting off only to be jolted awake by the phantom echo of Mr. Denton's dismissive laughter. Yet, as he stepped into the bustling chaos of Prescott Elementary's hallway, something felt different. The usual whispers and playful shoves felt charged with a new energy. He saw Mila and Gwen huddled by their lockers, their eyes meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and something akin to respect. He couldn't quite place it. The usual knot in his stomach loosened just a fraction. "Hey, Jallen," Mila greeted him, her voice softer than usual. Gwen just nodded, a small, shy smile playing on her lips. He usually just mumbled a quick hello and hurried to his desk, desperate to become invisible. But today, he felt a strange pull to linger, to bask in this unfamiliar warmth. "They actually believe me," a small voice whispered in his mind. The thought, so fragile just yesterday, now bloomed in his chest, a tentative bud of confidence pushing through the hardened soil of doubt. Did you see your dad on the news last night?" Gwen finally asked, her eyes wide. Jallen nodded, a small, hesitant smile finally breaking through. He'd stayed up late with his father, watching the replay of the local news segment covering the career day. Seeing his father on screen, explaining the intricacies of aerospace engineering with such passion and clarity, had been a balm to his wounded pride. The news segment had also included a brief interview with Mr. Denton, his face a carefully constructed mask of professional enthusiasm. Jallen's father hadn't mentioned the classroom incident, choosing instead to focus on the importance of encouraging children's curiosity. Jallen understood. His father's quiet strength wasn't about public retribution. It was about setting an example. "He was so cool," Mila chimed in, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "My dad just sells insurance." Boring. She wrinkled her nose dramatically, a gesture that usually irritated Jallen, but now seemed endearingly childish. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, chasing away the last vestiges of yesterday's chill. It wasn't just Mila and Gwen. Other classmates, kids who usually ignored him or even teased him, now offered hesitant smiles and curious glances. Even Kevin, the class bully, gave him a respectful nod as he passed. The unspoken apology hung in the air, thicker than the morning mist. They saw him. The thought echoed in Jallen's mind, a triumphant refrain against the lingering doubts. They saw my father, and now they see me. The classroom buzzed with a different energy that morning. Mr. Denton's usual air of authority seemed diminished. His smile felt strained, his voice a little too loud, as he attempted to regain control of the room. But the whispers continued, weaving through the air like invisible threads, carrying the story of Dr. Brooks, the NASA engineer, Jallen's father. During reading time, Mr. Denton paused by Jallen's desk. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then hesitated, his gaze lingering on the worn cover of A Wrinkle in Time. A flicker of something regret crossed his face before he moved on, his silence speaking volumes. Jallen's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of triumph and a strange sense of pity for his teacher. He understood, in a way he hadn't before, the weight of Mr. Denton's own insecurities, the need to maintain control in a world that often felt unpredictable. He glanced at Mila and Gwen, catching their supportive smiles. He realized then that the validation he craved hadn't come solely from his father's appearance, but from the quiet shift in his classmates' perception, from the unspoken acknowledgement of his truth. He had weathered the storm of doubt and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, more resilient. The day unfolded with a newfound lightness. The lessons, usually a blur of anxiety and boredom, now held a spark of interest. He participated in class discussions, his voice clear and steady, no longer choked by the fear of ridicule. He felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced before, a quiet understanding that even in the face of disbelief, his truth held power. The world, once a daunting landscape of doubt, now felt navigable, full of possibilities. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the whispers and doubts would eventually fade, replaced by the quiet hum of self-belief. He had his father, his friends, and now, most importantly, he had himself.